So here's the question. Do the way we think of freedom of speech, or the way we thought of it in 1776, is it the way we should still be thinking of it? Or, and I'll just put this out here, should we take into consideration a changing environment? Is that crazy? Because my critics will say, it's not in the Constitution. I know that. I know that. I know it's not in the Constitution, but thanks for telling me over and over. I'm telling you that we should adjust so that our rights are compatible with the reality on the ground. And the reality on the ground is if you get kicked off of social media, you're effectively closed out from freedom of speech. A lot of people telling me that Trump getting kicked off of social media is not a blow to free speech, because free speech, and let me explain it to you like they explain it to me. Scott, oh, you're so dumb. Don't you know that free speech is the government? It's not about private industry. Private industry can do anything they want, if it's legal. But they don't have to guarantee your freedom. Walmart doesn't have to guarantee your freedom. Social media doesn't need to guarantee your freedom. There's nothing in the Constitution that would require that. Scott, you low information idiot. So that's what I've been listening to for the last 48 hours. Let me add a little to that argument. First of all, to my critics who explain to me that freedom of speech is a feature of government and not private industry, let me respond to you this way. Duh! I knew that. Pretty much most people were smart enough to be in the conversation. They knew it too. So why are you telling me something you know and I know, and you should know I know it, as an argument? It's not an argument to tell me something I already know. You need to add something to it. Here's my argument, because I'm not pedantic, and I live in the real world, and it goes like this. If you were to look at the arc of time from, let's say, 1776 to today, lots has changed. For example, the media has consolidated. Back in 1776, freedom of speech, if your newspaper didn't want to print it, I suppose you could go to another newspaper. Or you could write it on a scroll, or you could yell it in the town hall. Those were the only tools you had, but at least you had options, right? As the media consolidated, coming towards 2022, it became certainly your right to have free speech, but in a practical sense, if you don't have free speech on the dominant speech platforms, you don't really have freedom of speech. What you have is a legal right that you can't use. Let me give you an example. If you were in a coma, do you have freedom of speech? The answer is, yeah, you do. You're in a coma, but you have freedom of speech. Does it help you? What are you going to do with your freedom of speech when you're in a coma? You don't have real freedom of speech. Technically you do, but in all practical ways, do you have freedom of speech? When, let's say you're in jail, and you're not allowed to talk to the outside world, and you're in solitary confinement, do you have freedom of speech? Well, legally, yeah. But in a practical sense, do you? Not really, not in any practical sense. If the only way that people communicate in any effective way, in other words, communicate with lots of people, if the only good way to do that is social media, and that's the way it's evolved, and you can't use it, do you have freedom of speech? Technically you do. Technically you do. But do you have it in a practical sense? No, not even close. So here's the question. Do the way we think of freedom of speech, or the way we thought of it in 1776, is it the way we should still be thinking of it? Or, and I'll just put this out here, should we take into consideration a changing environment? Is that crazy? Because my critics will say, it's not in the Constitution. I know that. I know that. I know it's not in the Constitution. But thanks for telling me over and over. I'm telling you that we should adjust so that our rights are compatible with the reality on the ground. And the reality on the ground is if you get kicked off of social media, you're effectively closed out from freedom of speech. And so, we should consider whether we want that to be the situation or not. Now, I've heard the argument, Scott, if you don't like these platforms, just go start your own. Go over to Parler or Gab, go over to Rumble. You got options, just like these guys. In fact, you probably have more options than they had because of all the new social media platforms. But really? Let me tell you what that sounds like to me. It sounds like if I tell you that the local energy company that has a monopoly in your town, if they decide to stop selling you electricity, do you have options? You do, yeah. You could take a balloon and rub it on your hair, and it would create static electricity. So why do you need the electricity from the power company when you could just rub a balloon on your hair? That's the argument that my critics are giving me about social media. Scott, you don't have to be on Twitter. You could shout from your porch. You could go on Parler where nobody hears you, except the people who already agree with you, so there's no point in talking to them. So, do you really have options? Technically, yes. And if you're really, really fucking stupid, you think that those options matter. They don't. They don't matter. If you're not on Twitter, you just don't exist in our world or the other social media. So, if you think rubbing a balloon on your hair is the same as having electricity, then yeah, going to Parler is just like being on Twitter. But it's a stupid fucking argument because in the real world, these are monopolies. They're good ones. I love Twitter. Twitter's awesome. But they're monopolies for all practical purposes. Again, maybe not in a technical sense, but in a practical sense they are. Should we update our school textbooks to reflect the end of free speech that just happened? Don't you believe that we should not be teaching kids that we have freedom of speech in a practical sense? Because we don't. As of today, if your kids are taught in school that they have freedom of speech, that's not true. They only have freedom until some big company tells them they don't, and then they don't. And by the way, do you think that the social media companies would have done what they did without pressure from the government? No fucking way. This was the government suppressing your free speech. You tell me that those social media companies could all make their own private, independent decisions? Yes, they can. Do you think they did? Not a fucking chance. Not a chance. The government, or members of it, pressure the social media companies, and then the social media companies cave and do what the government wants. The government being Democrats. So, when you argue with me that the government is not the one who is suppressing your freedom of speech, it's Twitter, you're a fucking idiot. That's not what's happening. It's the government pressuring the companies, and the companies being compatible with or agreeing with the government go along with it. Not one of those companies was going to ban Twitter because they wanted to, right? Well, maybe. I mean, I don't want to be a mind reader, so I suppose anything's possible. But if you're telling me that the government is not pressuring, the Democrats in this case, if you tell me they're not pressuring the social media companies to get rid of Trump, well, that's just stupid, because you can see it. It's right in front of you. They're actually doing it in public. Am I wrong that the government is in public calling for the social media companies to ban freedom of speech for a member of the public? This is happening right in front of you. I'm not making anything up. You're watching it. Everything I've said, except the internal intent part, is something you can just observe.